Hello, everyone. This is the Thursday recording for week 9. I'm just going to basically finish up the chapter in what I think will take around 5 minutes. This is the last slide that we ended on. We watched the video about the placebo effect, and before that, we were also talking about other ways in which, participant expectations or what the participants know about the study can influence their behavior in ways that we want to kind of control for and mitigate. So this is all stuff that we covered. What we're covering next is things about the experimenter, which could influence the results in ways that we want to rule out and control for. So expectancy effects or experimenter bias is basically the impact of the experimenter. So if I'm running a research study, like I might do things differently in such a way that influences the outcome of the study, so that I find what I want to find. So for example, like if I gave the example sort of earlier in the Tuesday recording, about like there was a study set up at the University of Illinois where they were like seeing how people react to getting bumped in the hallway and seeing how people from different cultural backgrounds react in particular. So if I was the experimenter and I had a certain hypothesis that people from one cultural background would react more severely, and I was the one doing the bumping, I might bump people from that cultural background extra hard, maybe unintentionally, just so that I could find what I want to find and that they would then react more severely. I guess maybe that wouldn't be unintentional at that point, but it's also possible that, like kind of researchers do things that are like truly unintentional, but like just differ between groups in such a way that influences the results. So basically, when you're setting up an experiment, it's really important to think about this and eliminate all possibilities for like things to differ across groups as a result of what the experimenter sort of wants to find or expects to find. And the main ways in which we do this is essentially blinding people to information about the study. And so in a single blind experiment, the participant is unaware of which group they're in. And so if we think about it in relation to like a drug trial, and we're trying to kind of control for that placebo effect in some sort of way, like we wouldn't tell the participant whether or not they're receiving a placebo or the actual drug. And typically that's always how it's done in placebo controlled trials, because if someone knows it's a placebo pill, it's not going to work. They need to really truly believe that it might be an actual drug. So that's a single blind experiment, and it's single blind in that it's only the participants who are unaware of which group they're in. In a double blind experiment, double blind, so both the participant and the experimenter and anyone else sort of involved in the experiment, they don't know which group participants are in either. And so obviously, like someone has to know which group people are in, otherwise like the things wouldn't run effectively. But it would be someone, in this case, someone who's not at all involved in the actual like interactions with participants, who's deciding whether or not a participant gets a placebo pill or the actual treatment. And so that would essentially, the experimenter would give them the pill, but the experimenter themselves wouldn't know. And so they would, in a way, like not be able to sort of lead on which group they're in if they did know. So that's pretty much the main things in terms of like thinking about designing an experiment and things that we would consider. And this is kind of, the meat of it. Like there's a lot of other things too that are more specific that we're just not going to cover in this class. But I think what we did cover thus far is, like I said, the most important things to know about planning an experiment. The The other thing, just to sort of say, so certainly it takes a lot of time and planning, and given that it does take a lot of time and planning, what researchers often do is to set up what's called a pilot study, where so you've thought through all the sort of details of your experiment, and you just want to make sure that like before you go live with it, like everything is running effectively. And so you have like a small number of people go through and you make sure that everything works. And then you collect data from everyone, which is where the real kind of cost comes in. So that's one way of sort of mitigating risks associated with something going wrong. Another sort of related thing is what's called a manipulation check. And so this is basically just like something that you would do. Oftentimes you do it in a pilot study, and you just want to make sure that like whatever you're manipulating about this, the independent variable actually does have its intended effect. And if it was like, yeah, for example, sleep duration, and you were limiting people's sleep by like putting on a noise or something in the room, like you just want to make sure that like that noise is actually limiting people's sleep and that people aren't able to sleep through it. And so that's where a manipulation check comes in. It's just like basically ensuring that the manipulation truly is actually working. And then finally, the final step after participants have gone through a study is a debriefing session. And that's especially important when there was some amount of deception in the study. So participants weren't told really what the whole thing was about, or in that example where there's like someone bumping someone in a hallway, like you don't want to just let people walk away thinking that they were rudely bumped. Like you could tell them that that was part of the study and what we were looking for. And you do this after the data has been collected so that it's not going to impact the results in any way. Finally, so once you actually have a data set, you would run statistical analyses to see the actual results. We're going to talk about some of these statistical analyses towards the end of this course. But basically in terms of experiments, what you're looking for is whether or not there actually was a relationship between the independent and dependent variables. And so typically what that means is like, did the two groups of people differ on their scores on the dependent variable? And also sometimes there's a pretest, which we talked about last week in terms of the different sorts of experiments you can set up. So is there a relationship is that statistically significant? And then how big of an effect is there? So if there is an effect, like it could differ in terms of like how much does sleep quality affect test performance? You could look at that in different sorts of statistics. This is the final content slide, but basically the last thing to know is just that like when you do, so after you've analyzed your data and you've written a paper, there's two sort of main ways in which research is shared with other researchers in the public. So meetings that are sponsored by professional associations is one of those two ways. And so these are often called conferences. So like the APA has a conference every year, all the major like associations. So my field, Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology, there's a conference every year, and basically everyone goes to it every year because it's a great way of keeping up with all that's going on in the field and sharing your own research with other people. And then the second main way in which research is shared is through peer-reviewed journal articles. And so basically when you submit an article to a peer-reviewed journal, it's going to undergo this review process where it's also like typically a double-blind review where the authors don't know who's reviewing it and the reviewers don't know who wrote it. So that because some of these fields end up being fairly small and that like a lot of the researchers know each other because they go to conferences together. So that element of making it anonymous kind of ensures that things are more fair. And some of the journals differ in terms of their like prestige and how difficult it is to publish in. And the more prestigious journals that people read the most because they know they're the best journals, they end up rejecting like over 90% of the papers that are submitted because they really only want like the best research to be published. So that is everything. this is just the review, but yeah, basically we talked about different levels of complexity in terms of straightforward versus stage manipulations, different ways of measuring dependent variables, these issues in terms of the sensitivity of measures of floor effects and ceiling effects, single blind and double blind experiments, and then pilot studies and manipulation checks and their importance. So that's all for chapter 9. I'll see everyone next week.